Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the school board meeting. This meeting is called to order. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I don't know who the first motion was,
Dr.
but
Paulson.
Mr. Hyatt was the second. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the agenda is adopted, and we will go to the only action item, which is the advertisement of the proposed tentative millage and budget. Mr. Rella?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Roy, and thanks for the opportunity today to talk through our budget a little bit. And millage, as we know, it's been a really unique year with unique circumstances. But, regardless of that, we have been working behind the scenes, staff has, and the executive team to deliver a budget for board approval that does our best to address the priorities of the board and, of course, trying to stay within the funding constraints that we have. Before I get into the TREM process, which is really the more statutory part of this process, I did want to take a few moments or minutes, I should say, to kind of review where we're at. We've obviously already had budget workshops, but I wanted to kind of update the board and provide some additional information. Everyone can see my screen okay, right? Okay. So we'll start with the staffing. Obviously, this is the biggest piece of the budget. It makes up 80% of our budget expenditures for the general fund. A big piece of that, of course, is our teaching and teaching staff. So kind of how we work our staffing allocations. Of course, we have the board adopts a staff manual, which includes ratios for elementary at 18:1, 4 through 8 at 22, and high school at 25 students per teacher. And those, of course, change from year to year. And what you're looking at here is kind of a comparison of the FTE from last year, where we created the budget, to the projected FTE for the 2021 budget, which is the upcoming school year. So these numbers really drive a lot of our budgetary decisions based on the needs we anticipate at the school individual level, but then collectively as a school district, when these students move around from school to school or, go from one grade level to the other, it does have pretty significant impacts. As you can see, our overall projected FTE is going up and by a little over 300 kids. But there are some pretty significant swings I wanted to point out to the board and the public, namely the elementary K-3 and the other, and what really makes up the other section is our scholarship students primarily. And we have two scholarship programs. We have the McKay Scholarship and the Family Empowerment Scholarship. And what we've seen since the empowerment scholarships were approved is pretty significant expansion. The governor has talked in great detail about that, but essentially what that is private public school students being able to take the money that they generate through the FEFP to private schools, private religious schools, and other schools within the district that are non-public. And that's definitely something we've really kept an eye on. Makes it difficult to staff because we don't know how many kids, how many students are going to be going. We've estimated an additional 250 students for the scholarship program for this year. And, in terms of eligibility for that, you can either get a family empowerment scholarship if you're a rising kindergartner. So if you're coming into kindergarten, you can elect to go to get a family empowerment scholarship. Or if you were a previous student at the previous year, you can elect to. So what we've seen is huge jumps, particularly in kindergarten. That does impact our staffing. So you can see the projection for K-3 is down 150 kids. In the primary grades, another 51. And then we have seen a bump based on projection for middle and a smaller bump for high school, and then charters are pretty consistent. So based on that, overall, you can see the right section of the presentation. You'll see the impact of those student adjustments and ratio adjustments on the overall. So the overall, what we call base instructional staffing projections are down 14.6 students. And again, that's primarily due to the family empowerment scholarships, the impact on K through 5. There are also, a ton of adjustments when we go through the budget process. So obviously, this is just a summary of all the changes that we have made thus far for next school year. You've got the student ratio units, which we just went through. We make adjustments for ESE, specifically like the school-based ESE, based on the needs and the services we have to provide those students as they kind of go through the grades. We have looked very closely this year and most years, to be honest, at how we pay for certain positions. And, we have a lot of federal grants. And of course, right now the pressure is on our general fund budget. The federal grants tend to be pretty consistent with what they get in terms of funding, and those generally increase a little bit each year. So in as much as it's possible, we're always looking if it's feasible within the federal budgets to shift things around to release some of the pressure on the general fund budget. So the ESC department, we were able to move some units for instructional positions to the IDEA budget. We are expanding or creating an AVID program at Hawthorne High School. We're doing a teacher section for that to get that program up and running. We're for the East Side High School, we did find an additional position for the culinary arts program, and that's coming out of the 1 mil. And then for the next two, obviously there's a great deal of uncertainty on the funding, particularly for IB and the Cambridge. We get a certain amount of funds for each student that passes those rigorous exams, and then also if they get a diploma. And we did not have IB tests this year, and the Cambridge did not have a test either. There was a score that was calculated by the teachers. We're still kind of trying to get some clarification from DOE on how they're going to fund those, but we needed to support those programs a little bit more this year, just based on funding, so they can kind of continue to serve the students. We added a section at Newberry and Santa Fe for African American Studies, and credit retrieval at the high schools. This is a program that's been really successful in helping those high school students who are behind get caught up. And I think we did that the previous year and took the unit out of reserve. We went ahead and put it out there so we can get folks hired up to help those rising seniors and juniors to graduate. We've been providing what we call differentiated accountability unit at our 7 high need schools. We've changed that funding source to Title I for next year. And we eliminated a teacher on special assignment in adult ed that was due to a retirement. And then we have adjustments to school page units for 7.15. So overall net reduction in instructional units of 8.79.
Alex, is the school base you're adding, they're putting the cost to the school? Was that 7 that you had there? Was the school paying for that?
I'm not sure if Valdi is on the line to ask that specific question.
Okay.
Or maybe Aaron might know the answer to that. But we have district-based Title I funds that are more for parent involvement, and then you also have the school-based and the rank and serve,
Right.
and stuff like that. We'll definitely get see if we can get an answer on that.
Right.
For the support staff, the ESPs, we did take some time this year and look at vacant positions. Obviously, with the economic conditions that we're in, we're really concerned about, a potential mid-year cut One of the biggest concerns we have right now is the student enrollment. Any kind of fluctuation, particularly decrease in student enrollment, can have a really significant impact on our financial condition. So we did eliminate some vacant positions. We can always add those back if things end up being less impactful in terms of the economic state than they appear to be at this point. But in terms of balance in the budget, we felt it was appropriate to kind of look at some of those positions. If they were vacant, let's hold back and then kind of assess the situation. If we need to add them back, we can. So for the student assignment specialist, we did a little bit of reorganization in the FTE state reporting department. We, I think, eliminated 2 positions and added 1 back. One of those positions was a student assignment specialist. We eliminated 2 vacancies at facilities, a drafting technician in planning construction, a mechanic in transportation, and an administrative secretary in physical distribution. More of like the district-wide view. We always make adjustments based on student counts at all the schools. And that's, again, it's all driven by students. So net increase in aides district-wide, 0.68, adjustments to clerical, and then paraprofessionals, of course, and adjustments to school paid units. What's probably a little bit, is a little bit unique for this year. As everyone knows, we lost the Head Start grant, competitively bid to Episcopal, and the way that program worked, you've got your 3-year-olds and your 4-year-olds. Your 3-year-olds are your Head Start kids. The 4-year-olds are VPK, and we kind of blend those 2 classrooms, blend the funding sources together. So if you pull the Head Start out of the equation, we couldn't really run an effective VPK program. I know Ms. Strappy and her staff are going back and we'll be working all fall to make sure we have something going. We're hoping at the beginning of 2021. For now, we had to eliminate the positions. We can always add those back. It's really subject to the planning that's going to need to take place to get a VPK program basically up and running in a completely different form than it looked last year with the blended program. So overall, net reduction in ESPs of 32.32 units. For professional and technical, we did absorb some staff. I shouldn't say absorb, maybe that's not the right word, but we had staff on the Head Start grant, and I think we've done a really good job of placing most everyone at last check that had their position reduced. I think we've been able to place most of those. There are some positions we're going to have to keep on, obviously, as I mentioned before. VPK, we're hoping to get that up and rolling as soon as possible. So we do need some, obviously, clerical and support staff and administration. So the executive assistant that was paid for at a Head Start, we're bringing that employee on or keeping her on to specifically address the voluntary pre-K program. We added a program service specialist. This actually happened in the middle of the year or early in the year last year in the security office to assist in the FSAT and some of the clerical and just general program stuff that's involved around the school security, which has become obviously a really, really important thing. We did convert a chief accountant to a senior accountant. That's obviously the senior accountant's at a lower pay grade, so that will help us balance the budget. In purchasing, we added a senior buyer. We are going through, or will be going through a reorganization. We've got a retirement upcoming in that department, so we'll be looking at different ways to kind of address our staffing issues. But we felt at this point we'll certainly need another senior buyer position. And then the FTE state reporting office, like I said before, we eliminated 2 positions and added an analyst, an instructional technology analyst. And that position really works closely with the schools to help them go through the reports, make sure everything's clean. So when we submit our files to DOE for FTE, it's all clean and everything looks good. And that's really just support for the schools. So total increase in the professional and technical of 3 units. For administrative, not many changes this year. As I mentioned before, we're always looking at, how we're paying for units and, are they serving some of the IDA students, how many of those students. So we've shifted ESE supervisors, and it's not necessarily one unit, it's pieces and parts of units. So you might be, half general student services and then half IDEA. So we've looked at those splits really closely this year and provided some savings to the general fund budget. And I will say Donna Kidwell, did a really great job of helping and working through those issues and, trying to balance everything. And there's a lot of needs of the district. This allows us to kind of, provide a little bit of support to the general fund, not changing anything programmatically. And then the executive director for early learning, obviously that position was paid partially out of Head Start, partially out of VPK. And with the Head Start going away, we're moving that position full-time to VPK. So that will represent a half a unit, more or less. So overall reduction in administrative units of 0.79.
No, I couldn't hear it.
Mr. Rella,
Yes, ma'am.
what's the difference between the executive director, where you said you're moving that voluntary pre-K, and then
Oh, I
you have-
tried to go to the other computer.
Sorry, we're still dealing with the technical issues.
and
So
then the executive assistant voluntary pre-K on page 4.
So with those two positions, there was no change in position. It's really a funding, how we were paying for the position. So for the executive assistant, she was working 100% with Head Start and working on that grant and working with students.
So because you have no names and you may not want to put the names out there, are those two different positions?
So the executive assistant on this slide, this is support staff. So this is, think back when you were at Duval, you had a bookkeeper and executive assistant that handled all the payroll, all the budgetary.
Okay,
It's
got
really more or less a bookkeeper.
okay, thank you.
It's the executive director. And again, neither of those positions were eliminated. We're just changing the funding. Now that the grant's gone, we would obviously keep those employees on, but we need to pay for them out of general funds.
Okay, thank you.
So overall, when you look at compared 2019, 2020 budget positions, a little over 3,400 for next year, we're proposing, or this year, I should say, overall 3,361 units, so a reduction of 38 units. But again, that a big chunk of that is the elimination of the VPK program, which we really hope to have back up and running as soon as possible.
Mr. Rella,
Yes, sir.
and thank you. Going back to page 4 just a second, the program service specialist for a security office, that's more, it's a position that used to be funded from a different source, and is that the case?
So for that position specifically, obviously we created the security office.
Right.
I think it was 2 years ago, and we had one position. So the one position is the security chief. What we found out subsequent that is, that's not a one-person job when you think about the FSAT, all the individual site stuff that we have to do. So the security chief needed support badly because he can't be doing the paperwork and submitting stuff to DOE. We needed his intel and his knowledge to be addressing the security. So we added that position to help relieve that work responsibility. So obviously priority is the security of our students. So freeing his time up to do the security piece and making sure we're in compliance with FSAT and all the different reports and stuff that we have to submit to DOE.
Right. And if I remember correctly, this position was originally a teacher, a criminal justice teacher, and then,
Right.
Or is that a different position?
No, that's the same position. I think we were paying for like a part of the position, like it was a part-time.
Right.
the person
Alex, I can-
part-time- Thanks.
Right, I could jump in. So this position, this was one of the teachers in the criminal justice magnet program and her skill set. And she was interested in making that move. We actually used a different position. We had a vacant position that we used last year because she's been in that position since, I think it was October of last year. We got through the first 9 weeks and waited until they were able to secure a replacement for those students. And so this is the first year it's been budgeted as a full-time position for this work. So she monitors all the threat assessment data, the threat assessment team data that we have to collect that's required by the state, all of the security audits for the building. So there's a lot more paperwork than what we ever realized that came along with the security office. And most of that is compliance. And the DOE, the Safe Schools Office, us being able to provide documentation that we have done certain things. All of our security drills we have to document and submit. And so that, like I said, that position's been in place, but this is the first full year for that position.
Thank you, Superintendent Clark. That was my understanding. I just, wanted to point out to the public, particularly that if you look at our spending for security out of Safe Schools funding, it doesn't represent an increase in our end of it. It just it means that we're using a different source of funding. So the appearance, I just wanted to make sure that was clear. So thank you, Superintendent Clark. Thank you, Mr. Rella.
Mr. Rella,
Sir.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Isn't our Safe Schools money being reduced too, right, this year from the state?
Right. So you're actually jumping ahead a few slides, but we'll definitely look at that. I think it's 2 slides from this one.
Sorry.
So that's actually a great segue.
Before you segue over there, can I ask a question on the positions?
Yes, ma'am.
On page 3, the school paid units, it says district-wide, there's a reduction of 4.54 units. Can you tell me what that is?
So we allow, or not allow, students, or I'm sorry, schools elect to purchase units out of discretionary funding source. So if you're like at Gainesville High School, you've got the Cambridge program, you might need additional clerical help to help with that, or an IB program, or maybe you just wanted additional para at your school to float around. We allow schools to purchase units, for lack of a better term, out of the discretionary funds. And that simply, it represents a reduction of school, cumulative school-based decisions on, what their budget looks like for the following year. Do they want to pay for this positions? What we generally see, Ms. Certain, is, once they get to the beginning of the school year, a lot of times they'll say, all right, well, I see a need for guidance clerical, or I see a need, for custodial, or whatever the case is. And then they'll advertise a position and fund it out of those discretionary funds.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rella. Alex.
Yes, sir.
Well, we just don't, another thing is, like Cambridge and that, right now, we don't know how much money we're gonna have for them. Bringing in, I think that's what you said at the beginning?
Yeah, so we're obviously keeping an eye on that. I've got a conference call tomorrow with DOE to get some clarification, because for the IB program, there were no tests, and basically we get FTE or additional funds in 2 different flavors. We get it for the kids that graduate with the IB diploma and Cambridge diploma, and those that pass the tests.
Right.
For the IB program, they're going to get their piece for the graduation, which is a small, 10 to 20% chunk, but the big 90%, it appears as though it's going away. And again, we're waiting for clarification on that. The same is true for the Cambridge program. There was no test, but there was the Cambridge program set up, the international program set up a process to which a teacher did, I think, what they called a predictive score. And the predict, based on the student performance, based on previous grades and assignments and things that were done, the teacher would predict what they thought the student was going to get on the test. And then Cambridge accumulated all that information it went back and audited it. So they went back and said, Mr. Rella, you're saying 90% of your students are going to pass. Well, only 20% passed last year. You're going to have to provide some data, some rationale for that. So they did go back pretty thoroughly and audit the Cambridge, and we're hoping, and we should find out tomorrow from DOE staff, if they're going to treat that predictive score as an actual pass test. Obviously, for funding's sake, I really hope that they do. The funds have been allocated in the budget, but it's really important, particularly this time of year when, at GHS, they're making staffing decisions. They had this, pot of anywhere between $300,000 and $400,000 for Cambridge that they really utilized to reduce staffing, reduce or add to staffing to reduce class size. And it's pretty much gone away, but we're hoping we're going to get some clarification that will make us feel a little bit more comfortable about them using the predictive score.
I don't know how.
Predictive score for FTE. So we're keeping an eye on that. But that's the reason we added some additional coordinator positions out of the mill, recognizing the fact that, this is most likely going to be a variable for IB. It's going to be a very lean year, and Cambridge could be as well.
Well, that answers why you had those 7 units earlier that I asked about.
Right.
I think. But okay. All right, Mr. Rell, I'm sorry. You're doing great.
So the FEFP funding summary. So this is something obviously the board's pretty familiar with seeing, but this, for the public, this is our main funding mechanism, provides over $223 million to the district per year. It's primarily based on students, number of students, types of students, the services they require, but then there's also kind of all kinds of categorical and different parts that we'll talk about. So this is a comparison from how we ended the 2019-20 year, which is called Calc 4, to where we're starting this year. And this Calc 2 budget version was released, I think, Friday evening. And we've kind of done our best to adjust things and get everything to the board as quickly as we could. But just some highlights, and this goes through legislative session as a result of the budget conference, when the two legislative bodies get together and say, hey, how are we funding schools? Let's tweak this, let's tweak that. We always spend a lot of time talking this as board members. I know you guys are pretty attentive to this. So for this year, we're seeing a $40 per student increase in the base student allocation. And the base student allocation is kind of more or less discretionary funds that we have. It's not specific to a categorical program like Safe Schools or reading or turnaround or anything like that. It's just general funds. We are looking or projected to receive 220 additional students. Again, very concerned about building a budget around an increase in units. When I spoke today with the Ed Stephenson and the E-School, and they're getting a lot of requests for homeschool. So that's a situation we're going to be keeping an eye on, but those students do represent quite a bit of funding. And if you're not reducing your costs, i.e. staff and services at the same ratio, the students are decreasing, which is really, really, really challenging to do. You can find yourself in a bad situation very quickly. So again, we're going to be looking at that, keep an eye on it. We're hoping the Digital Academy is going to be something that can really, really help us retain those students and obviously educate them and keep our staff on and so we can kind of get through this. One more piece on this, we did see an increase of our tax roll, 4.9%, and then our required local effort, again, is decreasing this year, I think for the 7th or 8th year running, and we'll talk about that a little later, but it is down based on our certified millage rate, 0.229%.
Incredible.
So this is kind of where the funding gets fleshed out. Obviously, we talked about the base student allocation. That's increased $40 a student. I went in and highlighted all of the categorical pots of money in blue. And basically those are pots of money that are designated for a special purpose or specific purpose. And, it has to be used for that purpose. We send reports and get audited on those things. So for example, the digital classrooms for this year, 107,000, obviously that's woefully less than we need for digital classrooms. But we can't simply use that money for mental health or something else. Those are specific pots of money. Our hands are tied, and that's really what they have to be used on. So some highlights, obviously there was a lot of adjustments to categoricals. Digital classroom was chopped pretty good. Our Safe Schools is down $32,000 for next year. The legislature did invest, I think, an additional $25 million statewide in the mental health services. So we obviously welcome that. And our portion of that's $257,000. The funding compression was approved again for this year, but they did make some programmatic changes to that, and those led to the overall funding compression a decrease to $644,000. We are going to receive additional funds from the compression adjustment. That's related to the millage, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Some minor adjustments to supplement academic instruction, the ESC guarantee, and then what was talked about obviously a lot during session was the elimination of best and brightest, which eliminates $2.8 million, but those funds were moved down to help pay for the teacher salary increase allocation, which is something we're going to be working through over the coming months on how to implement that and negotiating it. And then some other, what I consider relatively minor adjustments to instructional materials, transportation, teacher lead, etc. So overall, FEFP increase of 5.1 million. And then from there, obviously we talked about the required local effort that's decreasing for next year. It's actually below the rollback rate. And so that's going to cost us in terms of not realizing those tax dollars, $600,000. Some adjustments to the class size reduction funds. And then one of the only things that the governor vetoed that impacts us, as at least Alachua County as a district, was the veto of the school recognition and lottery funds. I personally was in support of that because, you know, the school recognition is based on school grade. And if there's no school grade to compare for the previous year, no sense in tying those funds up. Some adjustments to the discretionary millages again, and the required local efforts. So total potential funding increase of 5.1 million, which is $119 per student. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on what that looks like. Obviously, when you see 5.1 million, that seems like a lot of funds, but typically what we see, and this of course isn't universal, but you know, when you start moving the categorical balances, obviously when you create a new categorical, like the teacher salary increase, that makes it seem like, you know, we got this huge chunk of money, and we are very appreciative for the funds, specifically for the funds for our teachers. They're woefully underpaid, and we're going to hopefully go a long way to address that this year, but it's not funds we can pay our utilities with. It's not funds we can use to pay our support staff with. It's very specific. So what we've done on this slide is try to summarize what I would call like the purchasing power, or maybe like the discretionary funds the district has to address certain issues that have come up and will continue to come up during the year. Obviously, we're getting additional funds, 5.1 gross overall from the state. 4.9 of that is the teacher salary allocation, so we can't really do anything but teacher salaries. So that best and brightest was eliminated, school recognition was eliminated, so we're adding that back. Mental health decreases our overall discretionary funds, and then other categorical adjustments. The big ones are obviously the family empowerment scholarships. Those are funds coming, students going from public or from rising kindergarten to private schools. Those funds fall then. We're anticipating that they're going to double this year. So an additional $900,000 that would have been available for the district is gone. For the additional students, for our students, obviously, if we have additional students, we have to provide teachers, we have to provide support staff. That's what we call student workload. That workload represents, based on the base student allocation, 1.7 million that for the services we have to provide them. The FRS rate was a huge one this year. This is one we were really hoping we would be able to get vetoed, and we worked really hard on our end to make that happen. It didn't happen. Regardless, the FRS overall rate is going to cost us 2.7 million, and then the health insurance, of course, was I think 8% increase for next year. So when you include all those factors together, the 5.1 when it comes to really funds we have discretion for really becomes a negative 3 million, which means we actually have less funds discretionary to address the needs of the district. So when we kind of incorporate the revenues for the FEFP, we have a lot of different sources that sources of revenue. That's obviously the largest. So this slide compares the budget we approved or the board approved last year to what we're asking you to approve tonight for advertising. Obviously, the big ones are going to be your FEFP. We have seen a reduction or not seeing as much in terms of Medicaid reimbursement as we would have hoped. So we've adjusted that. And a lot of these just get adjusted based on recent history. Obviously, the FEFP is a big one. The elimination of the lottery and class size and the score recognition. For the VPK, like I said, we're hoping to have a program running mid-year. So we did budget some revenue. Obviously, it's not the 1 million we usually do. A reduction in the required local effort. We have, like I said, seen an increase in the tax roll. So that really does benefit us for the 1 mil and discretionary mil, the 0.748. The interest, obviously, as we know, the economic conditions are such that, everyone's seeing reduction in interest earnings. So we've decreased that. And then adjustments to miscellaneous local bus fees, food service and direct costs, we're anticipating going up a little bit. And the big one, obviously, is the transfer from the 1.5 mil. And we're as we've talked about, we're allowed to transfer funds from capital outlay to general fund to reimburse ourselves for costs such as property casualty insurance, software, maintenance staff. And it's kind of a mechanism for helping us balance the budget. Last year, we transferred 5 million based on what we've seen, and there's some reasons. We're up a little bit over 6, and I know we have a couple items still left on the table. Any kind of additional costs that it's not paid for elsewhere or amended in the budget somehow would add to that overall transfer from capital, so it'd go over the $6 million mark. I did take some time on Monday, and as I was riding into work, I just was thinking about millage rates. Don't ask me why, but specifically on how different local jurisdictions handle them. Obviously, for the school board, ours is our required local effort, which is our largest, is controlled by the state. So we basically just get whatever they give us. As you can see on the far right of the first column, you can see our rate has gone down pretty significantly over the last 7 years. For the Board of County Commission, they seem to have followed would seem to be the rollback rate or something near there, but their overall millage rate has decreased. And again, when you look at the growth in the tax roll, I was looking specifically for the school board. The tax roll in the last 5 years has gone up 36%. So, and we'll look at that on the next slide. But if we were able to maintain our millage, it would provide some pretty significant additional funding for the district. And then, of course, the city of Gainesville, based on their last few years, has either maintained their millage or increased it. It looks like a couple of years, particularly last year. And obviously, when the tax roll goes up and you either maintain your millage or increase it, you're really benefiting from that tax roll increase. Fortunately, we haven't been able to do that. And then also, I did put in this slide the preliminary rates. course, for the school board, which we're asking for approval for tonight, and then the Board of County Commission. I have not seen anything from the city of Gainesville at this point. I know they're right in the middle of their budget building process. But you can see the overall, the graph on the right, you can see the overall trends in local millage rates. Particularly on the required local effort, and this kind of speaks to what I mentioned before about, you know, being able to maintain our millage rate, because, you know, additional tax roll really benefits, and it almost acts kind of like as a COLA, if for lack of a better term, for school districts, and that's how it was treated for a long time. Of course, recently that thought process has changed, and the results is, you know, what we see and the funding constraints and the pressure we have on all of our budgets. But this is just a hypothetical. I do this every year, so I updated it. Basically, you know, in 14-15, our required local effort millage was 5.162 mils. If we had maintained that millage rate for the following 6 years, you know, as a district, we would have received an additional $84 million. I think that's really powerful information, but also speaks to, you know, the constraints that we're under as a district. And then, you know, of course, as we've talked about, when the state gets in trouble, they can't raise more tax dollars for sales tax. So this is really their only option, but they've decreased it such that it's really it would be a challenge for them to increase it in any kind of meaningful way.
They shifted it to sales tax funded program from, I'm going to get one more. I know I say this all the time, from the most equitably funded program in the United States, not the best, but the most equitably. They are destroying it. And this is now when the roosters come home to roost here. And that's why we're suffering on this. I just had to say it again. It's just disgusting.
Right. So I think I've mentioned this in the last budget workshop, but, you know, the part that really scares me is, you know, we went through the Great Recession, and we all remember that, and the huge impacts it had on our budget. Well, the sales tax is actually a higher portion of the state's revenues now than it was then. That, you know, again, really challenging to raise the property taxes, and they can't raise the sales tax. So, you know, it kind of creates a lot of issues funding wise for the state, but all those are going to unfold, you know, in the next few months.
Sorry for interrupting.
So for appropriations, and this is the general fund, I did give the board a bunch of reports, you know, that look at the general fund by object and different categories. And then I had a report that shows the school budgets. It kind of breaks down the general fund, federal, food service, and then a similar report for departments and the 1 mil. I know that was a lot. I did take those reports, and I think combined they were somewhere around 370 pages, but it is a few different reports. And those have been put on the finance budget website. If you go to the school board website, there's a little $sign that's for fiscal transparency. All those reports, this presentation, and a bunch of other stuff from previous years is all on there. So this is really just kind of summary data, but there is a great deal of detail available to the public or the board should they want it. So this slide really just compares the general fund appropriations by categories to salaries, benefits, purchase services, energy services, etc. And I'm going to go into more detail on this in the coming slides on what kind of makes up those changes, because they've been kind of rolled up together, and we'll go into more detail. But you can definitely see, you know, obviously the commitment the board has made to increasing salaries. That's obviously, you can see the funding is really going there. And then on the employee benefits side, you know, again, those trend with salary in terms of costs, but there's also the FRS rate increase and the group health insurance and stuff like that. So overall, for appropriations for last year, 252 million. For this year, we're looking at 258.5 million, and we'll go into some additional detail on that. Before I go into the salaries, I did want to mention, and I think I've at least verbalized this to the board, but one thing we saw, and it's something I honestly did not anticipate, maybe I should have, well, I definitely should have, was the staff attrition. So as an organization, we have, over 4,000 employees, 3,300 FTEs at the district for general, but then obviously have a lot of federal. But we, as a district, we benefit, budgetarily speaking, not operationally, but budgetarily speaking, from staff attrition, where you have, someone maybe in my position or in any position that's leaving at the very top of the scale and being replaced, by someone that's brand new. There's obviously, from a service standpoint, an impact to the operation, but just strictly from speaking to budget, we do benefit from that, and it's pretty consistent every year with the attrition that we see. This year, we have seen record low attrition.
Alex, you appear to be frozen.
This year,
If he's
You appear
talking,
to
I
have
can't hear.
lost Mr. Rella.
here
Can anyone
Yeah,
hear me? Because I got
429.
the same. Oh, Alex, you've frozen both video and most of your audio.
I froze.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we're getting some on our screen that says our internet connection is unstable right now. Yeah,
Uh-oh.
so I don't know what that is attributed to right now. Maybe the storm, I'm not sure. Internet connection is unstable right now. That is attributed to maybe the storm, I'm not sure.
Can you hear me and see the presentation at all?
Yes, we can now, at least from the district, yes.
Yes, we can hear.
And people are freezing and unfreezing, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going on, but if it gets worse, just let me know. So basically, the attrition for 2018-19, we had 429 people leave or retire from the district, and this year 294, so 135 less retirements, and that's unusual without doubt. So we'll keep an eye on that going forward, but that does increase our salary costs because we are retaining those qualified employees with experience. Just to go into a little bit more detail on the salaries piece, and I'm kind of broke these out and given a little bit more detail on the overall categories and the categories within. So administrative, slight adjustment there, increase. Teachers, obviously between the teachers and the other instructional support personnel, which are also teachers, that's where the board is putting most of their funds. Aides and paraprofessionals, obviously the biggest impact here is going to be voluntary pre-K and the elimination of that program, and then support personnel and obviously board members. So overall, increase of $4.6 million for salaries for next year. For the benefits piece, group insurance up 8%, $1.7 million increase to the board costs, and then FRS 2.7. Those are huge deals. And then of course associated Social Security and terminal pay, those go up when salaries go up. The benefits set aside is really for when we set aside benefits for stuff like the Best and Brightest program, where we know we're going to spend it. We don't know how much it's going to be at each school. We set it aside, and then once we pay out those Best and Brightest bonuses, we distribute the funds. It's just a simple set aside. So we're setting aside funds for that purpose. And then early retirement, slight adjustment there. So for benefits, $4.9 million. I will say it's extremely unusual to have the benefits and fringe benefits portions increase more than your salaries, but with the insurance and the FRS, that's just simply the case this year. For purchase services, we did make an adjustment mid-year when you look at the professional services decreasing and the other purchase services increasing. We did move the cost for Kelly services from professional services, professional and technical, to just general other purchase services. So that's why that looks kind of funny. but the net is pretty much the same. Slight increase in the property casualty insurance, which we went to the board a few months ago. Travel, obviously, those are individual school decisions, but you anticipate we should see a decrease in travel this year. For software and technology services, we did move the cost of the Skyward software, which is, I think, $650,000 from general funds directly to capital. That's allowable under the ad. We felt that would help us kind of balance the budget by having that cost directly in capital. Some other minor adjustments, water, sewage, and then distributions at charter school. We did, I'm sure you guys are, the board is aware that we did have a charter school close Genesis, I think 2 weeks ago. We got notified, or it might have even been last week. But we already have adjusted the budget to account for that. So we are, right now looking at hopefully retaining some of those kids and getting them back in public schools. But regardless, less funds going to charter schools for based on that closure. For energy services, propane is down slightly. The LP, liquefied petroleum, as we've kind of talked about when we went through the bus lease purchase, and the bus lease purchase is driving a few of these budgetary changes, specifically, the elimination or selling of the LP buses. Obviously, selling them, we don't need an inventory. The petroleum, so we have decreased that budget, particularly on the electricity. You've got a few schools that we know about, obviously under construction, like Idlewild, and of course we're moving those kids from Idlewild to Prairie View, so those might offset themselves or might be reduced. Bishop, for this year, the school itself will be completely raised, so there'll be no cost specific to Bishop. Those costs will be evident in the Westwood Swing School campus. And then Metcalf is under construction, or will be under construction, I think, in a couple weeks. So that overall is helping by just having less square footage, is going to be helping our electricity costs. And then up for diesel, and this goes back to the bus lease purchase. If you remember, one of the benefits operationally was if we purchase these 80 buses, we're replacing them with buses, I think, get somewhere 8 to 10 miles per gallon of diesel, and we're replacing the ones that get 3 to 4 to 5. So there is a pretty significant savings in fuel efficiency for the new units, and we have adjusted those budgets, as we mentioned in our meetings, up in advance of the bus lease purchase. So overall, for energy services, decrease is $731,000. For materials and supplies, not real significant changes this year. Just general materials and supplies set aside. Those are adjustments. General supplies, the vehicle parts and vehicle repair parts. Those are, again, going back to the bus lease purchase, those 80 buses, which represent, close to half of our fleet, are under warranty, I think, for 5 to 7 years. So we're not going to need as many parts. So it's going to be warranty work that's going to be done by Matthews Buses. So we don't need to budget as much for parts. So just now we're kind of getting to the trim portion of the meeting. So just to kind of remind the board, the process, obviously today we're asking the board approval to advertise the budget and millage in the Gainesville Sun. That's going to run this coming Saturday. The following Tuesday, July 28th, we'll have the public hearing to approve the tentative and millage and budget. And then the final approval is September 15th. There's a lot of time to look at this stuff and make amendments if we need to. But this is the general timeline. So as we mentioned, We are benefiting from an increase in the tax roll. Our final gross taxable value for 2019 was 17.1 billion. It's going up over 18, so that's an increase of 5.09% for next year, and that benefits us most significantly with our 1 mil funds, and then our 0.748 for discretionary. The rollback millage rate is a computed millage rate that, when applied to the new tax roll, generates the same revenue as the prior year. We say that before every presentation because right now we're going to get into all of the rollback calculations for all of our millages. So the required local effort, as we know, it's the rate itself and funding is set by the state. It's required for us to participate in the FEFP, which provides $223 million to the district. For last year, the required local effort rate was 3.896%. 3.896 mils, which generated $66.98 million. To generate the same amount of funds, the rollback rate is 3.766 mils. And for next year, or for this year, I should say, we will levy the required 3.667 mils, which will generate $66.26 million. Discretionary operating mill, this is a compressed mill. So by levying this mill, we obviously raise, over 13 million, but we receive over 4.2 million in compression funds from the state. So you get a little bit more bang for your buck for this millage rate. So for last year, we levied the 0.748 mils, which generated $12.86 million. To generate the same amount of funds, the rollback rate is 0.7232 mils. And again, for this year, we're recommending the maximum 0.748 mils, which will generate $13.51 million.
With the compression.
Plus the compression, correct.
With the compression. Okay.
For the capital outlay, obviously this funds a portion of our capital needs. We obviously have the sales tax. And this discretionary mill is capped at 1.5. Last year, we levied the full 1.5, which generated $25.79 million. To generate the same amount of funds, the rollback millage rate is 1.4502 mils. And again, for this year, we're looking at the 1.5 mil levy, which will generate $27.1 million. The voter approved operating, this is our 1 mil, funds our art, music, media, guidance, band, chorus, career technical, and technology magnets. And for last year, we of course levied the approved 1.0 mils, generated $17.19 million. The rollback rate is 0.9668 mils. Again, for this year, we're going to levy the full 1.0, which will generate $18.07 million. The combined required local effort, discretionary operating, capital outlay, and voter approved operating millages combined. Last year, we levied 7.1440 mils, which generated $122.82 million. To generate the same amount of funds, the combined rollback rate is 6.9068 mils. And for this year, we are recommending a combined millage rate of 6.915 mils, which would generate $124.94 million. The millage recap, this is just kind of like a summary of essentially what I just went through without the rollback rate, but you can see the only adjustment to millage rates is for the required local effort that's set by the state. It is a reduction of 0.229 mils, which is a reduction of 3.21% for next year. So before I read the recommendation on the approval, I did want to tie up any loose ends. If there's any questions the board has on this presentation, previous presentations, any of the other documentation that was sent, want to address that now.
I'll say something, just one thing. In the 20-something years that out of the classroom and involved with meetings. This is about the best presentation. The other people were very talented too, but this is very good.
Thank you, sir.
Are you finished, Dr. Paulson?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Excuse me.
Thank you. Mr. Bell, I had a question. I couldn't keep up and I didn't like note them all, but I know there were some things you said we were moving from general fund to capital, which was allowable. And that we were bringing out of the 1.5 mil, I think it was, let me go back, 5 million. So I was just wondering the impact on the 1.5 mil. I know that the taxable value has increased, so that the revenue that's coming in will be more in the coming year. But I'm just wondering how is that going to impact, and this is kind of related to our conversation I had with Mr. White about the Bishop overrun or the Bishop price increase estimate. How is that going to balance out? You know, we're bringing more out of the 1.5 million into the general fund for allowable expenditures. But I think we've taken out more than what the increase is. So we're kind of like, not that it's a net of zero. So I'm just wondering what's the impact on that. I can leave it as such and I can kind of run it up and we can talk about it offline, but I'm just wondering if you know that offhand, if you kind of anticipated that one of us would ask you that.
Right. So certainly, as you mentioned, definitely an impact on those kind of decisions. The two not fundamental, but the two changes we made this year. What we had been doing is charging the Skyward software, the $650,000 out of general fund and then reimbursing ourselves out of capital during the year. Obviously, we're kind of changing that and just charging it directly to capital. That's an allowable expense. So I'm not sure that would really have much of an impact. What the piece that does have an impact is, as I mentioned before, we kind of use the capital outlay transfer to balance our budget in certain situations. So I think we can go up. I calculated, I think last year, based on the allowable expenditures included in the capital outlay ad that are typically operational, I think we can go up to like 8 or 9 million in terms of costs that are operational costs that we can transfer capital outlay funds to cover. But you know, we obviously the capital outlay funds are extremely valuable. Of course, the operational funds are extremely valuable. So it's definitely a trade-off. You know, I think we had more pressure this year based on the FRS rate increase and the group insurance increases more so than we had in capital, because those needs haven't really changed, or not needs, but those budgets haven't really changed a great deal. But we are seeing an increase in the capital revenue. So those are conversations that we definitely had. And, you know, it's a little bit of a balancing act trying to make all that happen. And of course, we have to deliver a balanced budget to the board. So all those kind of things come into consideration.
Okay.
I can see, I'm sorry to interrupt. I can see Mrs. Roy talking. We have her on two computers and it doesn't look like either one's giving us the sound right now. So I'm going to have her unmute the other computer. The Chromebook, Mrs. Roy.
I can't see anything but Mr. Rella's screen.
Okay, but at least we can hear you now. So.
Okay. I can't see myself, but okay. Well, Mr. Rella, are you going to make a recommendation since you finished your?
Sure, if there's no further discussion, I'm certainly happy to do that. So the superintendent recommends that the school board approve the 2020-2021 proposed tentative millage and budget for advertising.
So moved.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Seconded from Dr. McNeely. All in favor?
No, wait. No, I got it. I'm going to propose an amendment, please.
Yes, I was going to wait.
Well,
Okay.
The time for an
make the
amendment.
amendment before you vote.
That's right. I'm sorry. Discussion, Dr. Paulson.
Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment to add to the 1.5 mil, the things that it could be used for athletic facilities and enhancements. It's not spending the money, it's just for the future. Example, in a year or two, we got a lease coming up with the Citizens Field.
Dr. Paulson, would you say it a little louder, please?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'd like to make an amendment that we use the 1.5 mil or be able to use it in the future for athletic facilities and enhancement. And one of the reasons we have a Citizens Field doesn't belong to us anymore. It's we are on a lease, and that lease is coming up. Just as one example, we might have to be making adjustments for that. But again, it's not to use the money right now. It's to use the money in the future when things get better. But I think it needs to be in the advertisement. Used for it's under where construction and remodeling, I guess, Mr. Rella.
Yeah. So any kind of yeah, there's a very natural place for that in the construction and remodeling section. We would just simply need to add the verbiage, which you just mentioned, and that will allow us in the future to use these funds to upgrade athletic or enhance athletic facilities.
Right, and and athletics is important. It's as important as anything else. More kids probably get college scholarships in athletics than anything. And so anyway, that's my reasoning. The Citizens Field is a worry right now, especially with the city commission, and we don't know what's going to happen. But anyway, we have that ability once the economy gets better, and hopefully we'll be able to use it. So
I have a
Okay, would
question.
you like to make a motion?
I have
Yeah,
a
make it.
question for discussion with that amendment.
Well, we got to get a second.
Got to get a second first, yes.
A second.
It's been seconded by Mr. Hyatt. All right, discussion, Dr. McNeely.
Mr. Rella, since Dr. Paulson has inserted this and it's gonna go for now discussion and then possibly a vote, I want to know how quickly, because I was speaking with some folk just yesterday, and we have a project going that will be on the action item next at our board meeting. And before I give my approval or a vote for this amendment, I'd like to know how quickly can this money be used?
So just in general terms, kind of how this specific capital outlay advertising works, obviously we're going to levy 1.5 mils if the board approves this tentatively and then finally in September. But basically what this advertisement does is outline everything we can spend. That doesn't mean we will or have to address everything in here, but this sets the baseline for which any of the funds can be spent. So in terms of how quickly, I mean, the board would need to obviously send it to the public for advertisement and then tentatively adopt it, and we can spend off a tentative adoption.
All right, thank you for that.
Which will be next Tuesday.
Yes, thank you.
So I have a question. The Citizens Field lease, is that up in this year, 20?
No, I don't think it's another year or two. I'm not sure. Mrs. Clark would know.
I think it's 2022.
Yeah, I thought it was 22. I'd had a conversation probably 6 months ago or so with city manager and some of his senior staff. And we had just a very brief conversation about that and, obviously the city has not finalized what plans they're doing, but, wanted to just put that on our radar in case there may be something we need to do in the meantime, even if they, just do some enhancements or something to Citizens Field. Is there something we need to do during football season for a time when they're doing any kind of enhancements or not? But they had not made any set plans. So, but the actual lease itself, I believe, is in 22, but I will firm that up with Mr. Wise. I'll send him a note and see if he can give us the exact exact year.
Thank you. So the capital layout advertisement, is this for 1 year, and I mean, we would advertise this year and could spend out of a tentative advertisement. I guess the only thing I'm concerned about is the sales tax revenue is most likely going to take a hit on due to the economic outlook the economic impact of the pandemic and what our outlook is. And then we've got some overruns in some projects. And so if we start adding athletics, Dr. Paulson, I'm an athlete. I appreciate athletics, but I don't want us to start putting major athletic projects on our capital expenditure list, or in the mix of this, because the way this advertising, just like we put everything in there, and as long as it's advertised, we can spend money on it. I don't want us to start doing that, and we kind of start violating the trust of the public, because we told them the sales tax and all of that, how we were going to be spending money to refurbish and renovate and rebuild schools, and we said it was going to be classroom space. It was not athletics and band rooms and things like that. So I'm a little leery of doing that. And if the lease on Citizen Field does not expire this year, there's always time next year to adjust that, is what I say.
Can I answer that?
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Paulson.
Nobody says we're going to use it this year, and it's there. And once it's in there, it could be renewed in the next year. So we can't use it without approval by the board. So
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. Mr. Hyatt.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that band rooms are classrooms. So I taught in one for quite a while.
Well, thank you.
Also, I think the key here is the differentiation between the wording, the ballot language for the half-cent sales tax, which is very clear. I mean, we have some things that are allowed that aren't even liked, I guess. But so no one is asking at all to have any of the money from the sales tax to be used for athletic facilities. This is specifically for the 1.5 mils. And also, as has been pointed out, that there are no projects currently planned for this. And it's better to be, I think, prepared for eventualities. If the money isn't there, we're not going to be able to do it, and it's going to have to be approved by the board anyway. And compared to other districts, and I think we all know that we have, when we have 3 city high schools that for the most part share the same field, that's difficult. And so I think just looking out for what may be the needs in the future is a good idea, and not one penny is going to be spent unless the board approves it. So I would be in favor of the amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Sure.
Ms. Hill in Brian Moore's office just sent me a message about the contract. Our lease on Citizens Field expires June 30th of 2024. It was a 40-year lease from 1984 to 2024.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. All right. Any more discussion on this item?
Madam Chair, I have another piece that I'd like to ask. I don't know who can answer it, but in as much that we might decide to vote on the additional amendment, I certainly would hope that there would be some type of consideration for all schools, not just one. Because if I'm going to put myself out there right now to vote for this amendment, when I bring up a school that might need some, I don't want any argument about it, because we would all be in agreement today that this is needed for future use for athletics.
Ooh, the echo.
All right. Dr. McNeely, I think when it comes up for expenditures, if it does, it has to be approved by the board.
Yes, ma'am, and it's gonna come up tonight.
Okay. All right. Any more discussion on that amendment to the motion? Hearing none. All in favor of the amended motion to include Dr. Paulson's addition?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye, I oppose.
Okay, Mrs. Certain. So the result is 4-1 in favor of the motion.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir, Mr. Hyatt.
we just voted to approve the amendment, so now we have to vote on the motion as amended.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I would point out that there is nobody in the boardroom that has come to speak on the budget, at this stage, nor has anyone called. And when we end this meeting, I'd like to spend a couple minutes talking about, just for those that might be already watching, how we'll do citizen input during the later meeting. I'm just jumping in just to put that reminder out there before we end this meeting.
Okay, thank you. All right, all in favor of the motion, the original motion as amended?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye, I'm opposed.
Okay, thank you. The result is 4 in favor, 1 opposed, and the motion passes. All right, and you said there's no citizen input, so if there's no further discussion from the board, this meeting is adjourned.